my name is Mariana, and I am an educator at the Natural History Museum of Utah. I want to welcome you for our question and answer session and the research class live. Thank you so much for watching. If you have a question for us today for our scientist specialist, just press the Ask a Question button or leave a comment on Facebook, and we are getting all of your questions. And today, we're really excited. We are going to talk with Jamie Butler. She's the coordinator of the Great Salt Lake Institute at Westminster College. Thank you so much for participating today, Jamie. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be doing something and talking to people.
How we are really glad to have you here. Thank you so much. And I would like us to start maybe if you can talk about your work and what you do and your research with the Great Salt Lake.
Yeah, so I actually have a fisheries degree from Utah State University, and lots of people think it's really funny that I started working at Great Salt Lake because most of the lake is too salty for fish to live in. But really, I wanted to study the bugs and birds that rely on the resources in our waterways. And so I have, over a career of over 20 years, I've studied brine shrimp. People harvest brine shrimp and feed it to, they use it as commercial aquaculture and feed it to fish. And then I started working for the state government that manages all of this harvest and tries to conserve bird populations because, you know, there's over 10 million birds that comes to Great Salt Lake every year, and it's a critical staging and breeding area for lots of different species of birds. And so after that, I came to Westminster College, where I work now, and I'm the coordinator of Great Salt Lake Institute, where we work with lots of our college students that are all undergraduates, so they're getting their bachelor's degrees, and we help them do research by connecting them to people in the community who are doing research, and oftentimes I get to scheme up really fun projects, and one of those is working with American white pelicans that nest on a remote island in the middle of Great Salt Lake. And so we help biologists with the state of Utah understand their behavior better using motion activated cameras.
Oh, that's so cool. You have a lot of projects. I love it. And I think one of the questions that we got here that it would be really interesting to know for a start is, why did you decide to study the Great Salt Lake? What made you so interested by it?
I accidentally got stuck working at Great Salt Lake because I got my first job. And when you get your first job out of college, you tend to take it. And I grew up in Salt Lake, and I didn't think very highly of Great Salt Lake either. Like a lot of people, in Utah, we love to hate Great Salt Lake, I say. But I fell in love with this place because it's so interesting, and there's lots of weird parts about it. But I started realizing how important it was and what an opportunity I had as a scientist to contribute to the knowledge that our community has about this really important lake, not just for birds, but also, you know, for people, both for recreation, and it's a huge economic driver for our state. So
Awesome.
I didn't mean to start working at Great Salt Lake. Isn't that funny?
No, but that's great. That's awesome. That's how great things happen as well. Like, thank you for sharing. And we have a question. We have like a bunch of questions from this person, so I think I'm going to ask like one at a time. Wayne from Oren is asking, how many species of birds live on and around the lake? Since you talked about like the birds, I think that's a really good question.
Yeah, so it's so cool because right now we are editing a book on the biology of Great Salt Lake. And so this number that I'm going to share with you is not out in the airwaves yet. So drum roll, please. There are 338 species of birds that relies on the various parts of Great Salt Lake. And some of these birds, I want to share a couple of pictures with you. Some of these birds, my friend Ella, she calls this the lake of superlatives. And so, oh, here we go. And so we not only have birds that live here in the summertime when we think about birding, but we have lots of birds like tundra swans. 75% of the Western population comes here. We have lots of cinnamon teals and other ducks that people hunt. Wilson's phalaropes, it's the largest staging concentration in the world, and snowy plovers also. We'll talk about pelicans. I never shut up about pelicans, so we'll talk about pelicans later.
Okay.
You know, California girls, world's largest breeding population. So lots of very important habitat for many species of birds.
That's really, really cool. And is also asking, do they migrate, and when is the best time to watch the birds? And is also asking, what are the ecological pressures Salt Lake birds face? So we can ask, like, do they migrate?
Okay, so I'm again gonna share something with you on my
Awesome.
screen. I just need to find it. Most of our birds do migrate. Some of them don't migrate depending on the kinds of birds. I gotta find my screen. My favorite birds though, and this is how I got stuck working at Great Salt Lake, are these little birds that are called eared grebes. And eared grebes, they come here in huge, huge numbers. They're really, really cool little birds. And they come here, over 5 million of them came last year to Great Salt Lake. So you can imagine how important the lake is for these birds. They have these kind of like funny red eyes, and you can tell if they're juveniles or adults by the color of their eye. If they're yellow, they're juveniles. But eared grebes, I mean, you can imagine if 5 million eared grebes comes here, that you're going to see them leaving. And this is an image from Weather Radar that some weather person sent me, and you can see this large cloud of birds that's leaving Great Salt Lake. So these eared grebes you can see usually in the fall. If you want to see these lovely little birds bobbing on the water, they're here late summer and fall through about Thanksgiving time. But really right now is, I think, the best time to go see the birds at Great Salt Lake. And I'll give you a clue if you want to go look at them. You can go to any of the wildlife management areas, the Bear River Bird Refuge, that's a federal system, Ogden Bay, and the Farmington Bay area has a lot of birds that you can go see. Antelope Island Causeway is like prime birding right now. The trick with this time of year are their biting gnats out. And now they're horrible little biting gnats that don't respond to even bug spray. And so if you go out to Antelope Island, plan on staying in your car and just watching from your windows. And if there's wind outside, maybe you can get out and see some of the birds and hear them a little bit better, but be very wary of the biting gnats.
And respect them for
yes,
sure.
Respect them.
Yeah. And the final question from Wayne was, what are the ecological pressures Salt Lake birds face?
So first of all, you know, the salinity of Great Salt Lake, so the salt content of Great Salt Lake, that dictates everything that can live in Great Salt Lake. So, you know, our lake isn't just salty, it's freshwater to hypersaline, meaning it's so salty you can't fit any more salt in the water, and everything in between. So we have this really diverse habitat, and that the diversity of salinity or salt content in the water is going to drive what macroinvertebrates are in the water, and they're also going to drive what birds can live in that area. So water levels to Great Salt Lake are super important, because the lower the water levels get, that increases the salinity. It concentrates the salt in there, and that's going to change what critters and what birds can take over. There's also a really important concept that, you know, birds have different size legs and they have different requirements for paddling around or for where they stand. And so the birds do move around Great Salt Lake to take advantage of different depths of water. And so, you know, if we lose all of our, you know, kind of shallow wetlands, that takes away a lot of habitat for birds. And so I would say, you know, Great Salt Lake is kind of hard to access, and so the birds don't have a lot of pressure from human disturbance necessarily. Some of them do, that's very general. Mostly it's these ideas of salinity and the water quality that's going into Great Salt Lake.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's really important. And before we go to our next question, I just want to remind everyone who's watching that if you want to leave a question, just press the ask a question button or leave a comment on Facebook that we are getting all of your questions, and we are getting a lot of questions here. So this one is really interesting. We just got it. Logan from Park City is asking, how much salt is there in the Great Salt Lake? That's a really curious question. I also want to know that.
Oh, good. Hi, Logan. I'm Jamie. I live in Park City too, so
Hi.
maybe I can like wave to you too. So Salt Lake, I can't tell you exactly how many pounds of salt is in Great Salt Lake, but I want to take you to a map right now, and I'm going to show you Great Salt Lake has been split into different microenvironments by humans. And right now we're looking at a satellite image from Great Salt Lake. And you can see that the bottom part of Great Salt Lake is kind of green in color. And you can see there's a railroad causeway. This is a railroad causeway that splits the lake into two. And because all of our fresh water comes out of these mountains that are in the east, this north part of Great Salt Lake is cut off from getting fresh water into it. And so these freshwater streams and rivers like the Bear River and the Weber River and the Jordan River from the south bring fresh water into the south arm. So the south arm of Great Salt Lake is about, right now is about 13 to 15% salinity. And compare that to seawater. Seawater is 3.5% salinity. So it's about 5 times saltier than the ocean. And then if you look at this pink part of Great Salt Lake, that pink part is about, it's about 22 to 30% salinity. So 10 times saltier than the ocean. And it's so salty that it can't hold any more salt in it. And so the salt precipitates out onto the bottom of Great Salt Lake. And in some places there are 11 feet of salt.
Wow.
And so, you know, Great Salt Lake is salty because all of these rivers that cover 22,000 square miles in the watershed, they bring small amounts of minerals with them. And then the water escapes out of Great Salt Lake through evaporation and leaves all of those minerals with it. So every year, and this is a really funny range, and I hope you guys laugh your heads off. And we need to know more information about this, and scientists are working on it, but they say between 2 and 59 million pounds of salt come into Great Salt Lake every year.
Wow. That's awesome. And that's really connects with some of the questions that I got here. Kaylee from Taylorsville, she has 2 questions. She says that I've probably heard the answer already, and that's totally cool, Kelly. You can ask like questions that you probably already know. We are here to answer our questions. She's asking, how did the Great Salt Lake end up with so much salt? And she's asking if there are like any benefits of this Great Salt Lake salt.
Yeah, so we actually harvest the salt out of Great Salt Lake. So there are mineral evaporation ponds, and they're just shallow ponds that help the water evaporate and leave the salt behind. And so we evaporate a lot of like road salt and ice melting compounds like you would spray on an airplane on an icy day. But the biggest thing is some of the minerals that are left are potassium sulfate or potash, and potash is used as a fertilizer. So lots of our soils are fertilized with potash from Great Salt Lake and the surrounding Great Salt Lake Basin. And that I need to remember my numbers. I'm not very good with numbers unless it has to do with birds, but I think in the range of $80 million a year is brought into the state of Utah through the salt evaporation industry.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. Thank you so much. We have a question. Oh, Mason from Park City is asking, how deep is the Great Salt Lake? That's a good question.
The Great Salt Lake is a very shallow lake. And so on average, I think the depth is about 13 feet. And so you can imagine if you have a very shallow plate of water and the sun evaporates some of that water off, that your shorelines are going to shrink pretty dramatically over time. So the deepest part of Great Salt Lake is in the area of about 32 feet, on average about 11 feet. I do want to play this video for you because it's really cool to see how what happened. Oh, maybe I don't have a video. Oh, never mind.
No, it's okay. Don't worry.
Technology.
It's okay. Totally fine. It happens all the time with us. I have a question. Oh, David via Facebook, he's asking, what is the migration range for grebes? Grebes.
Oh, grebes. You know, they fly south down to Mexico and South America. So a couple thousand miles.
Wow, a lot. And I had some, go on.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go on, sorry.
The state of Utah, let me find this section for you really quick. The state of Utah actually studies pelican migration. And you can go online to the PeliTrack, and you can watch pelicans that have satellite transmitters on them. You can watch them migrate, which is super cool. So right now, the pelicans are actually migrating to Utah for their breeding. They come here to breed on this remote island because they're very shy birds and they don't like to be around people. And it turns out that Great Salt Lake is a perfect place. There's not a lot of people. So right now you might see pelicans both feeding in your freshwater areas, but flying overhead also.
That's great. Thank you. I have a question. Connor via Facebook is asking, what do you think of the spiral jetty? And can you remind me why the water is pink?
Oh, I love this question. Okay, so the water is pink because it is so salty. And not very many things can live in it, but there are some microbes that can live in the north arm of Great Salt Lake. And so Spiral Jetty, a man named Robert Smithson, he came to Utah. He was looking for a place that had pink water, white shorelines, and black rocks around it. And you can notice in this picture, pink water, white shorelines. I always like to call the North Arm the sodium coast, by the way, because this is all just salt on the shorelines. And then this black rock you see, that's basalt that's left over from old volcanoes that are related to the Yellowstone caldera. And Robert Smithson came here and he was an artist that he was part of the environmental movement, and he wanted to get people outside of museums and into places that they wouldn't normally go. So this was built in 1970, and we do a lot of research out at Spiral Jetty because of these pink microbes. I work with Dr. Bonnie Baxter at Westminster College, and she can study these pink microbes both for clues to like DNA repair as it applies to cancer. So they have some special mechanisms that they can repair their insides and not create these mutations that would cause cancer. If you grow them on a agar plate, this is like salty microbe food. You see these really cool colonies of orange and red and yellow. And so cool. This water, this is my husband and my dog Rex. And Rex is a 40-pound border collie. Oh. And the water around the spiral jetty is that hypersaline 30% salt water, and it makes you very buoyant. So he's just laying back, no problem at all, not even moving his arms, and here he is hanging out with Rex.
Looks really comfy.
Yeah, except it's a little bit itchy. If you decide to do that, make sure to take solar showers. And then I don't have any slides to show you, but we also study the spiral jetty in the area around spiral jetty for NASA. So we get grants from NASA, and it turns out that the same environment that's around spiral jetty in the North Arm probably has the same components as what you would find on Mars, because Mars used to have lakes, and there's evidence of like water and salt and gypsum like you find out there. And so technology that's going to go on the Mars 2020 rover was created here at Great Salt Lake with some of our students and our faculty, which is really cool, right? Like this connection to Mars.
This is awesome. This is so good. I didn't know that. Thank you so much for sharing. That's so awesome. And I want to remind everybody who's watching, again, if you want to ask a question, press the ask a question button or leave a comment on Facebook for us. But I have a question here from Christine. She's asking if you can tell us more about the brine shrimp, like what is it and why is this important for the Great Salt Lake?
You bet. Brine shrimp are one of my favorite creatures in the entire history of the world. And that sounds really weird, but when I was a kid and I was growing up, I wanted to be like Jane Goodall. So Jane Goodall studied chimpanzees in the rainforest, and I was pretty sure that I was going to be Jane Goodall. The only problem is there's no monkeys in Salt Lake, and so I had to start studying brine shrimp because people do call them sea monkeys. They dance really awesome.
Oh, I love to see that. Look at them.
You used to be able to get them on the back of comic books for $1.25 or whatever, and they were called Instant Life. And they were called that because what happens is the brine shrimp in the winter time, all of the adults die off. In the cold water. And the way their adaptation to keep living is they create these dormant cysts that are encased in keratin. So I liken them to an M&M. They have this like soft embryonic center and this hard outside shell. And that allows them to overwinter. And then in the springtime, you can see how tiny they are. They're about 250 microns. And there's, hundreds, if not thousands on the end of his finger. And then in the springtime, right about now, they start hatching out in the warm water that has lots of algae. They eat algae, they filter algae out of the water. And then they live their little life cycle out in Great Salt Lake. Usually there's about 4 generations that we see. A lot of people ask how they harvest them. And what they do is these brine shrimp cysts, they float on the surface of the lake. And you can see this boat in the middle, that's like a 50 or 60 foot boat. And they float on the surface of the lake, and people in airplanes fly overhead and they call down coordinates. And then people race in speedboats out to these slicks or streaks of brine shrimp cysts. And then they use oil containment boom to contain all of these cysts into these hoops. It feels like a brine shrimp lasso in this picture. And then they put them onto these big boats. These are filter sacks, and each one of these sacks is about 2 tons of brine shrimp cysts. And so not only do we use them, but people around the world use them for fish food, and our birds also eat them. The eared grebes that I talked about, they eat 22 to 30,000 shrimp every single day.
Wow. Oh, they eat a lot. Yeah, but they're really, really, really small. So
I have some right here.
Oh yeah, I can see them.
Can you see those?
They're moving. Oh, cute. I think everybody can see them. They're so cute.
I know I can't tell, but
Thank you so much. They look awesome. And related to that, you were talking about like how they get them. And so I have a question. Nick from West Virginia is asking, what type of tools do you use to study the Great Salt Lake?
Well, right now, okay, so I do have one thing right here. And, Great Salt Lake is very hard to study because there's not very many lakes around the world that go to 30% salinity. And so all of the supplies that scientists use to test water are created for more freshwater systems or just moderate salinity systems like the ocean. And so a lot of times we use pretty low technology kinds of things to study the lake. This right here is a refractometer. If I were to put a little bit of water on this plate and then close this lid down, and I could look inside of this like a kaleidoscope, and there's a scale in there that says what percentage the sodium chloride is in the water, so how salty the water is. So some things like this, Great Salt Lake, I personally use a lot of binoculars out there because I do a lot of bird surveys and I do a lot of counting birds. But one of the things that we've been using lately, I'm gonna go to some pictures here. One of the things that we've been using lately are motion activated cameras. Because a lot of our critters at Great Salt Lake, especially the pelicans, are very wary of humans, and humans will even make them abandon their colony. And so you can go to gslpeliproject.org and you can find a bunch of pictures. So these are motion activated cameras that we're counting pelicans. We've learned that they take selfies. We know that they fight. And this is kind of an interesting picture because we know people have measured how far away pelicans nest from each other, and it's exactly 2 beak lengths apart is how far they nest. We can watch the pelicans come when they migrate to the island, which is important because with climate change, people think that pelicans are going to, and other birds around the world will start migrating at a different timing, and that can impact their health. We can watch them start to lay eggs. This pelican right here, you can see an egg underneath their foot. They work very cooperatively, males and females. So I don't know if this is the male or the female. They have look at these little ugly babies. They're so ugly and cute.
Aww.
And we watch behaviors like feeding. So pelicans, they live in a salty lake and they have to fly at least 30 miles each way, and they collect fish and they eat the fish in their bellies and bring it back to the babies in their bellies, and then they regurgitate these fish to their babies to feed them. We also know from these that we have predators on the island, and sometimes we see humans, which is a super bummer, but it's something that we didn't know beforehand. And so I also am thinking about tools. I could go on and on forever. I use a lot of undergraduates to do research for us. So they do a lot of work in the labs too.
Yeah, and I'm glad that these tools help you to find a lot of things about the Great Salt Lake. That's awesome. And about the birds as well. These pictures, they were awesome. I love them. And I think we don't have a lot of time, so I have a final question here from Ada from Los Angeles. She's asking, how can I get involved in citizen science, and how can someone maybe get involved with the Great Salt Lake?
I love that question. I was hoping somebody would ask that question. Thank you for asking that. So one way you can find us is at greatsaltlakeinstitute.org. On that website, we have links to where you can get involved on the Pelican project. We also build a lot of curriculum for K through 12 teachers, and that's all online.
That's awesome.
Greatsaltlakeinstitute.org. You can also, Zooniverse has a project called the Pelicamps, If you, you can see the Pelicams right here, or there's a QR code that you can click on right now. If you go to the Pelicams, you can help us analyze over 500,000 images of pelicans, and it's very easy. Kids can do it, anybody can do it. Each image only takes a couple minutes to look at, and you'll be telling us how many pelicans are in the picture, if there's other animals. You'll tell us if you see other like gulls or people, and you'll count all of those for us. I also wrote a book. So I have this awesome Great Salt Lake. It's the Great Salt Lake Monster Mystery. It's a book that you can find at gslsaltysirens.com. And just, you know, it's kind of like for the age range of like elementary school, kind of upper, maybe 3rd through 6th grade. And then in July, this book that I helped edit with Dr. Bonnie Baxter will come out through Springer. And it's about Great Salt Lake biology in a time of change. So thinking about water diversions and human consumption of water and climate change and what that's going to mean for Great Salt Lake.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing this. I was going to ask you to share this information with us like in the end, but thank you so much for sharing. And this is like really exciting resources that are coming for our teachers, for our students, for our parents. So like, that's awesome. Thank you so much. And I think we're unfortunately out of time.
And join us on
No, go
and
on.
join us on social media. So we're at Great Salt Lake Institute and at GSL Salty Sirens. And that's where we do a lot of our like outreachy social stuff. So we're on Instagram and Facebook for both of those.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for participating, Jamie. It was awesome. I learned so much and I know everybody learned as well. So, and I want to thank everybody who's watching. Thank you for participating. And tomorrow we're going to have another amazing class with Aiden at 9:30 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. Thank you so much and bye.